Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Josh. Josh, I do this every time. How do you pronounce your last name?
Boutwell.
Boutwell. I was going to say that too. Dang it. All right. Well, Josh Boutwell from the Troy Messenger here on HawkCast this morning, afternoon, whenever you're tuning in to preview Iowa versus Troy here this weekend in Iowa City. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment, hit subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening as well. You might be listening, but not subscribed. So make sure you do that today. Hit your that comment button and let us know what your final score prediction is for this game in Kinnick Stadium this weekend. So, Josh, tough start to the season for Troy. 0-2, new head coach, staff, whole lot of new players, especially with the portal and everything, how it looks now. What's the start of the season kind of been like? I mean, and like what's the read of the fan base? How does it feel right now for Troy?
Whole new everything, like you mentioned. But the funny thing is kind of similar to the last few years. Troy hasn't been 0-2 since 2014, but the last 2 years both started 1-2. So really slow starts and then picked back up and ended up winning more than 10 games in both seasons. So it's kind of a similar situation, but the fans aren't getting restless. I think, I think everybody's been they kind of understand this is very few teams in college football had to deal with the amount of turnover that Troy did in terms of not just players, but obviously a new coaching staff as well. And losing one of the better group of five coaches in the country obviously is going to hurt. So I haven't really sensed like any panic from the fans at all.
Right? You mentioned John Sumrall leaving for Tulane, um, and having a great record last season, 11-3. Then you flip to this year and take on Nevada and Memphis and start with two losses. So I guess is you mentioned the fan base. We talked about the fan base a little bit. Are expectations kind of tampered given the fact that it's a new staff, or or is it hopeful? Like, what does the rest of the season look like in terms of an outlook by the fan base? And
Definitely hopeful.
yeah, maybe even the staff and players from what you've heard.
Well, you know, when Gerad Parker did his press conferences Monday, he started it off by telling everyone that he wants everyone to have faith in the program and that he has faith in the team, and it just kind of felt like he's kind of reassuring everyone. You definitely don't sense any type of panic from them, and the fans. I don't know if I'd say they have tampered expectations. The Troy fans want what they want, which is a championship, and they want to be in a bowl game. I think that hasn't changed at all.
Okay. Now, with that in mind, you being the beat writer, you being around not only fans but the program too. I guess is this kind of the way you expected the season to start, and where are you at in terms of outlook? Do you think they turn things around? Because I mean, obviously this week's going to be a tough test for the Trojans, but going forward.
Yeah, I think the Nevada game was, is about as back and forth as you get. The game last week, it's so hard to really gauge that game because it was 7-7 when Goose Crowder, the starting quarterback, goes out. And I'm not going to sit here and say that had he not been injured, they would have won. But obviously, your starting center's already out. Losing your quarterback, obviously the game's changed. So it's really hard to gauge that one. The defense struggling is not what I expected at all. Even though they lost almost the entire starting lineup from the last couple of years, the way that they attacked the transfer portal and got some really good guys. I think everyone kind of expected the defense to sort of just jump in where the last couple of years they finished off, but they've struggled a lot. Giving up 200 yards rushing a game is not what you want to see going into Iowa for sure. That's got to get fixed quick, and that's obviously something that Gerad Parker has been talking about them concentrating on and trying to prove. And they have probably the linebacker group is easily the deepest position on the team, so you don't expect uh, those struggles. The defensive line is also fairly deep. I think they're definitely going to get it turned around in the next few weeks, but obviously injuries have to kind of settle down because I mean losing your center and your quarterback, and that's about as bad as it gets for an offense.
Yeah, that's a killer. So let's start talking about the offense. You mentioned Goose, you mentioned the starting quarterback Goose Crowder, and then the center. Are those long-term injuries? Are they going to be back this weekend? What does that look like?
No, they don't believe they'll be long term. When I asked about it Monday, Gerad Parker listed them both as probable. But kind of see how it goes as the week goes on. Um, I would say I probably expect both to play if they can. And I think they're probably trending towards that. Matthew Caldwell, the backup quarterback, actually played fairly well in the game, considering getting thrown in there first FBS action ever for him. Both centers that they have Boaz Stanley and Tyler Cappy kind of rotate in and out, and Stanley is sort of the sixth man on the line. He plays every position, so they both played fairly well as well. So I think they're confident in those guys, but obviously Eli Russ and Goose being in the game this week will be a major factor. And also last week, I didn't mention Damian Taylor, the starting running back, had to miss the first half because he got hit with a targeting penalty on special teams in the second half of the Nevada game.
Never ideal. Okay. Yeah. Caleb Johnson, who just had a great game last week, missed the first half of the season as well because of team violation. So a little bit of commonality between these two teams there. When we're talking about Goose, assuming that he is the guy this weekend, being probable, what are you looking at in terms of the way he plays the game? Because I'm seeing here that he had a decent amount of carries too. Is that just a byproduct of the offense? Is he a dual threat? Like what kind of quarterback is Goose Crowder?
I don't know that I would describe him as a dual threat, yeah, but he will scramble and he's not afraid. He actually got hurt diving in the end zone on a scramble. So he's more of a scrambler than anything, but confident would be the best way to describe him. He's very cool, very calm. He has a strong arm. He loves the deep ball. But I mean, really, they've talked about it being a quarterback competition since the spring. But even since back then, when people would ask me, I said it felt like it's Goose's team because when you talk to the players, they had pretty much embraced him as the guy really from the beginning. So the whole team is confident in him, and he's confident in himself. So confident would be the main word I would use for him.
And then as I looked, and I'm box score junkie, right, for stuff like this. It looked kind of like a balanced attack offense. Like, what do you know about their scheme and their philosophies as to how they approach the game with this new staff, with this personnel?
They want to be multiple. That's kind of the thing he's preached since getting here. It's a lot more spread out this year than it was under John Summerall. So you'll see a lot more of that than maybe in the last few years. But they definitely want to be multiple. They definitely want to run the ball. They have a three-headed monster at running back that they want to try to spread carries between Taylor, also Gerald Green, and Jordan Lovett. But spreading the ball out, spreading the formations out is something that I think it's the biggest change in the last couple of years. And Sean Reagan, the offensive coordinator, is a guy that was here at Troy under Neil Brown when kind of had the NASCAR style offense.
Okay. And when you mention spreading things out, I look at a couple receivers here, Peyton Higgins and Devontae Ross being those two guys. Of course, Iowa faced some pretty strong competition at wide receiver last week with Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. But not necessarily comparing the two, but it looks like these two are kind of the guys for them when they pass the ball. I guess would you agree with that? Maybe anybody else contributing that you say, oh, we got to talk about him with the offense and passing the ball.
Devontae Ross is for sure the kind of the alpha in that group. Higgins is the slot guy. He's the possession guy. Zariah Beeson is a guy that since I saw him in the spring, I've been telling people he's going to be a big time threat for this team, and he's kind of a deep threat, super fast. Mojo Dortch is another fast guy, and Landon Parker is a big, tall, lanky receiver, kind of an athletic freak. Which Ethan Connor, the tight end, is also a super athletic freak. During fall, he was kind of making it routine to make Moss the defensive backs and linebackers, and so he's a guy I got to watch out for too, for sure.
So as we flip to the defensive side of the ball a little bit, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Iowa and everything going on right now after that loss to the Cyclones this last weekend. Sorry, too soon, fans. I'm bringing it up twice back to back, but um, Cade McNamara back after 2 seasons that were ended due to injury and obviously JJ McCarthy taking over for his job at his last year at Michigan, and Brendan Sullivan being brought in from Northwestern. A lot of people are clamoring for Sullivan to get time now after Cade finished the game 5 of 21 over his last 21 attempts, and his second, third, and fourth quarter were terrible after he started 8 of 11. I look at the defensive stats. You mentioned the defense and their struggles so far, despite bringing in some talent from the portal. You have to think as somebody who covers Iowa, folks that are fans of Iowa, that now is or would be the time to bring in Brendan Sullivan into the fold offensively. Troy hasn't forced any turnovers so far to start the year. They don't have any sacks. Like from that vantage point, and as somebody who covers Troy and has seen the defense, would you agree with that? Is like it's time to shake. If there's any time to shake it up, it's now against a group of 5 team that's still kind of figuring out their way under a new head coach.
Yeah, I would say so. And you mentioned the pass rush. That's kind of what they wanted to be their identity a little bit, because pass rusher is one of the positions coming in that thought it was going to be a highlight for this team, and they struggled getting to the quarterback at all. And obviously, with a team like Troy, where you're struggling with the run, that probably would help you when you're bringing in a new quarterback and trying to break them in, and have that running game you can rely on. And if Troy doesn't fix the run defense heading into this, it'll probably be a long day.
Right. And there's, based on everything that Kirk Ferentz has said, and I've talked to some folks behind the scenes, and of course, folks who are premium subscribers know all about stuff behind the scenes from us. But I find it to be very unlikely Brendan Sullivan plays in this one, who's been the second quarterback on the depth chart. But if it does happen, it would be this week if I had to guess, right? And maybe Kirk looks at it as this is where we get Cade's confidence, through the roof, because it was against Illinois State, and it presumably fell off a cliff against Iowa State because he was bad. But when talking about the defensive strategy, a lot of issues with Iowa offensively have come from opposing teams stacking the box because they're not afraid of Iowa's quarterback beating them over the top. They're just not, and it's not like Cade has given teams a reason to be afraid of that, except for against Illinois State, who was an FCS team. Um, I guess would you imagine that'd be something they do? Troy does stack the box, considering how much they've struggled and how Caleb Johnson has played, Iowa's #1 running back, who went for almost 200 yards last week. I guess do you imagine Troy stacking the box and really selling out on the run in this game?
I don't think you really have a choice
Yeah,
to do that at this
yeah.
point. The fear there though is, and this is something that Gerad Parker talked extensively about when I asked him about Iowa State's offense. He talked a lot about Tim Lester. They have a background together. And interestingly enough, I was trying to drop hints during the offseason when the coaching search was happening, because I had people that were giving me little things. So I would drop little hints. And I dropped Tim Lister's his bio at one point, because I was told that he was in the finals for the Troy job. Of course, that fell through, but so that's kind of a little sidebar there. But yeah, he talked extensively about the play action game, and that's definitely something they're talking about, and they understand that stacking the box, which you're gonna have to. Troy's got a completely new secondary. There's not a single player in the secondary this year that started last year. So when you're leaving those guys out on an island, those play action passes can be deadly. But I mean, I don't think you really have a choice when you're struggling as bad as Troy is stopping the run. You've got to stack the box. You can't let this kid go for 200, 300 yards. It'll be a very, very long day in that case.
The thing about that from an Iowa's perspective, and then from a defensive perspective for Troy, is you're making Cade beat you. He's thrown off his back foot a lot and been inaccurate and thrown interceptions that he shouldn't have thrown. So with that in mind, I'm not saying Troy, I was on upset watch or anything like that, but you have to see that as an opportunity for if you're Troy, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that if you're Troy, trying to rattle that quarterback, I mean, that's again, the pass rush was something they thought was going to be a key for this defense. And if you're going to get them going, I think this is kind of a game that would be perfect for that. Eric Shaw, Philip Lee, Jamal Williams. These are all guys that were Raymond Cutts. Who, if you see Raymond Cutts number 0 on defense, you're gonna be like, holy crap, that's an NFL defensive end. And he looks the part. All those guys you want to get going as a pass rushers, and if you're able to get him off his mark, make him make mistakes, that obviously bodes well for Troy's defense for sure.
I actually I remember hearing Tim Lester had pretty much locked up the OC job at Troy, and then the Iowa opportunity popped open. Everybody at that point in time was really thinking it was going to be Kevin Johns, including myself, former Duke offensive coordinator, and then Tim Lester swoops in and snags that job. I guess tell me about what you were hearing in terms of like Lester's philosophy. Were you excited about the possibility of him being the OC? I guess, and then to see him flip to Iowa, like what was that like? Were you expecting something like that? Tell me what you were thinking.
That whole time was just crazy because like when it came to the head coach, assistant coaches, everything, like you were hearing so many different names that were thrown in there. But Lester, when you look at his resume, that was impressive in itself. And obviously, him coming from the NFL, Green Bay as an analyst was definitely intriguing as well.
Right. Okay. So tell me a little bit more about the Troy defense. You mentioned the pass rush, supposed to be the thing for them. The running has been more or less, I wouldn't say easy, but easier to do against that defense, like you've said. Young DBs. What's maybe been encouraging for Troy so far defensively?
Well, this is kind of a good bad thing here. The linebackers coming in was probably like I mentioned, the deepest spot, and there's been some struggles there. Obviously, talking about the run defense, but there's also been some pluses there too. Brendan Jackson is a transfer from Gardner Webb who has kind of become sort of an alpha on the defense, and he's a hard hitter. He's going to be in the backfield as much as anyone you're going to see. Jordan Stringer's another guy. He's a really good linebacker. Stephen Catledge, Terry Thomas. Those are all inside backers that kind of will all play, and they're all really good. And I think they're going to be a key to the defense continuing to improve and shoring up that run defense.
How about let's revert back to the offense before we move forward a little bit. Anything you mentioned Goose being, a positive when he's been out there, and Devontae Ross. What else has been encouraging for the Troy offense to this point? And maybe it's just those two. What do you think?
I think the offensive line, I felt like, especially with as many guys as they lost, they lost a guy to Texas A&M, and they had a ton of guys in the transfer portal. So I've been kind of impressed with. Obviously, there's been some struggles, but I felt like the offensive line has played pretty well. Especially when you lose your center, like I mentioned, those two guys that are kind of rotated in there. I felt like they did a really good job considering. And Derek Graham's a really good player on the offensive line, so I think that's been kind of the biggest, I guess, good surprise for the offense.
I know in Troy's history, relatively recently, they pulled some FBS, or I guess some Power Four, Power Five upsets. I looked back, I think it was 2017, 2018. They did it in back-to-back years. Like obviously, totally new personnel, totally new roster, totally new staff. Like, but is that something that's like, I don't know, like a cultural thing at Troy, where it's like there's always belief because it's happened before, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Oh, there's always belief. I mean, that dates back to, I mean, when I was in high school, Missouri came down here as a I think top 10 team, and Troy beat them that night. And I mean, since then, we're talking, I mean, even before that, I mean, they beat Mississippi State when I was like in junior high. Mississippi State, Oklahoma State, uh, obviously the one that everybody talks about, and how LSU paid Troy to come on homecoming and hand them that L, which is why you'll probably never see LSU ever play Troy again. Uh, but it's in the program, it's in the fan base for sure. They really hang their hat on that. There's probably some Power Four teams that don't want to play Troy in this state. That I mean, probably people can think of who I'm talking about. They've never played them and probably never will. And that's, I mean, you could think for, especially for recruiting reasons, why that don't ever happen. But yeah, I mean, obviously they hang their hat on that for sure.
If they were to come into Iowa City, go into Kinnick Stadium and pull off an upset, how does it happen?
It happens by being able to at least limit the run for sure, and I mean, I think Iowa obviously the offense is what everyone's always talked about the last several years, and I think this year people kind of expected it to be better, but I mean, you got to put up points. I mean, that's stop the run, put up points. That's the biggest things.
Okay. Now, looking at ESPN, I was given an 84% chance to win. The over under is 39 and a half, and the Hawkeyes are favored. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the 38 and a half. And the spread is 22 points. It opened at 20 and a half and it opened at 39 and a half. Right now, the total's 38 and a half and the spread is 22 points. So, that in mind, Josh, what do you think? What are you thinking as far as a final score? Like,
Oh
how do things play? How do things play out for the Hawkeyes and the Trojans this weekend?
man, there's so many variables there. If Troy can't stop the run, I mean, I think by halftime we probably would be like, okay, this is done. If they're able to limit the run, and I think if Goose and Eli are able to play, I feel like it's going to be a down to the wire type of game. I really think that is key here for Troy. I don't know. I'm thinking probably a 28-17, maybe in
Okay,
that range.
okay, all
If I
right.
can if I can figure out who's who on that score.
So I guess with that in mind, you think the Trojans can put up points against the Iowa defense?
I think so. But again, there's a lot of variables there. Um, they were sort of hot and cold against Nevada and played really well at the end. But then obviously last week it was sort of a I kind of look at it as a watch just because we didn't really see what they could do. Um, but again, if Eli Russ and Goose are able to start, I think they can put some points on the board.
So as far as a prediction goes, there are a couple things that go into it for me. After that loss last week, not only a loss to Iowa State, but a loss where you led for over 51 minutes of it. You know, you didn't let up that lead until there was 6 seconds to go. I really think not only the players are pissed off, but the staff are pissed off too. You saw a situation where Xavier Wampa got caught flat-footed. Cade just played awful, like I mentioned, the last three quarters. Caleb Johnson, a situation where he had the best game of his career at Iowa, and they still lost. Just a lot of variables, a lot of things. TJ Hall, I mean, he was caught with, I think it was Jaden Higgins in the end zone where the ball was in his hands and Higgins just ripped it away from him. There were so many things that just had to go wrong that went wrong for Iowa in this one, and I really think they're just pissed off. Like, I really think that's where they're at. So that in mind, I'm sure they're still sick of this offense being terrible narrative, even though they had their moments last week, even though they ended up losing. I'll go off what you mentioned or your belief in the offense and say Iowa 38-10, just given the circumstances, given where things are at, and given that it is a group of five team. And you know, to no fault of Troy's really, it just comes down to the circumstances, but Iowa also just having better athletes, right? Like that's just what you run into, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of a double edged sword that you talked about with coming off of a game like last week. You get, especially with Troy, you risk these guys being a pissed off, angry, run it down your throat team that can be bad for you. But then also in Iowa situation, that can also come off kind of flat off of something like that. Was it deflating for you? I think I think probably the outcome of the game is probably going to partially depend on how Iowa does come out.
Yeah, that's true, and that's something that was talked about at Kirk's presser on Tuesday. This will be up on Wednesday for folks to listen to, but and throughout the remainder of the week before the game starts. But that was something that was brought up. Is Kirk loves to reference teams from 20 years ago, teams from 40 years ago. I don't know if you've listened to a single Kirk preference, or excuse me, Kirk press conference, but you'll get the over under for 80s references is usually like 2.5. So he went back to 2002 today when they had, I think it was the Orange Bowl championship team, Brad Banks, Dallas Clark, like that year. That year they were expected to be really good. They lose to an Iowa State team that was not good. Seneca Wallace was the quarterback at that point in time. And the question was, how I mean, do you flip things? Do you turn the season around and go out and finish 11-1, 10-2? More likely 10-2 than not because Ohio State. Also, you got Wisconsin. Yeah, you got other programs. Nebraska's looking good. So it's going to be a tough way to end the rest of the season, but that's the question. And I think how they come out against Troy and set the tone is really going to be indicative for how the way the rest of things go. And if I had to guess, I think they come out pissed off. I think they come out hot. I think they come out trying to punch a guy in the mouth, not literally, but because typically in Kirk's tenure, from what I know, I've only been on the beat. This is my second season on the beat, but I am originally from Iowa, so I do know a thing or two. They come out flat off of bye weeks. Bye weeks is when they come out and struggle. But when they come off a loss, and you got guys like Jay Higgins in the middle of the defense, you got guys like Aaron Graves and Y.A. Black, who is certifiably insane. I really think they come out hot. And it might just be over by halftime, like you said.
It's they have to. Iowa has to make sure they're ready for when Patrick Mahotel comes to town from Nebraska, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah.
I had to get that in there when you mentioned it. I had to.
Yeah, Dylan. I mean, hey, it looks it looks legit. Patrick Mapartment, I think, was one that I saw. Yeah, yeah. Rayola's looking good, man. And that'll come Black Friday, so we got a ways to go to get there. But Josh, appreciate you hopping on, man. This is good stuff.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right, we'll wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode of HawkCast, brought to you by Iowa.Rivals.com. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today. Again, you can check out the quarterback situation. We got a ton of recruiting content going on the site right now, previews for the weekend, and more. Don't forget to hit subscribe, whether you're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Drop a like, drop a comment. What's your final score prediction? Do you think the Trojans can put up 17 points on the Hawkeyes, like Josh mentioned? Or is he certifiably insane like Y.A. Black? You let us know down there in the comments. For now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, and we will see you next time.